I'm JJ Perez. That's Greg Luca. Welcome to your UTSA football post-game wrap-up following a dramatic 31-28 win over Memphis Saturday in Tennessee. Greg, the Roadrunners kind of pull a little magic out of their backsides, I think, down the stretch of this one. And wow, just an incredible ending to a game kind of filled with everything.
Yeah, dramatic is a good word for it. I don't even know where you want to start. I guess
The
probably
end. The end.
okay. You want to start with
Yeah.
the game-winning kick? It was a really good kick by Hunter Duplessis to really come through, and there was no doubt he hit it nice and clean and set off that crazy celebration there. But who would have doubted that he would have any trouble with that?
I want to talk about how behind the curtain a little bit when you're in the press box at the end of the games, they let you go down to the field if you want to, cover the game from the field the last 6-7 minutes of the game. So I think I walked out and Sincere had like 30 something carries. And then I go down there and he's on that drive and they're up to like 40 carries.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a 22-yard rush there that helped set up the. I mean, they were just giving him the ball and letting him go to town there.
So I believe it was 7 out of 8 plays on that drive. It could have been 6 out of 7, but it was all but one snap that they gave him the ball. And that 22-yarder was the play that did it. It was I believe it was his 39th carry at that point, which I think that was the one that set the school record. He eventually got to 42, but it was also his longest carry of the day. He finally got loose for that 22-yard gain, and that put them into field goal range. And at the end there, they just gave it to him 3 more times and then set up the kick, which I think that's what you do. That's your workhorse. That's your guy, and he's been productive. And he came through for them, and then Duplessis came through to win it. So, yeah, I thought that they did what they should do there, in my opinion, is ride Sincere. It's what got you this far, and that's probably your formula for success going forward, too.
What about the 3 previous drives? It was kind of crazy there. It looked like Memphis was going to go in for a go-ahead score late in the game, but they have a holding call that negates a big passing play.
Yeah, you're right.
UTSA comes up with a turnover. Kelechi Nwachukwu recovers a fumble. UTSA turns it over on downs near midfield. It's like this whole kind of last half of the fourth quarter was wild.
I really want to talk about, and this will be something that I bring up in the interviews during this week, but I think Kelechi it's fascinating because if you remember at the end against Middle Tennessee, they gave up a couple of big plays late and there was a couple of scores there. And if I remember correctly, he was nearby. He might have, made some errors that led to some of that stuff. And for him to then be on the field in such a critical situation and then to come through like that is really, really cool for him and says a lot about the trust that they have in their guys to put him back out there and trust him to be able to make a stop in that situation. And that play happened so fast from my perspective. It didn't feel like there was a fumble, and then suddenly he just had the ball and Memphis was coming off the field, and there you go. Now UTSA is in position to try to drive the other way. So that was a really interesting part of the sequence, in my opinion.
So the Roadrunners had, I mean, watching the game, it felt like the defense was kind of on their heels a little bit. But if you look at kind of the way the game unfolded, Greg, I mean, to hold this Memphis team to only 7 points in 3 quarters after, the 21-point first quarter, that's about as good as you could ask the defense to do, especially when they created a few turnovers there, right?
Yeah, I think they came up with 4 punts and then they forced a long field goal that was missed. So it was basically 5 straight stops in that kind of middle stretch there, which allowed the offense to sort of find its footing and get back into the game. And I think that you looked at some of the big passing plays that Memphis got, and it would take a little bit more of a deep dive to figure out exactly what went wrong there. But it just felt like there were some times where they got beat deep, and it could have been that, like, there was the long touchdown. I know it was Clifford Chapman and Rashad Whitman were nearby, and Rashad was near some of these big plays, and at certain times, I don't know if it was a shortcoming on his part or what it could have been, and then there were times that it felt like Memphis could attack down the middle of the field, and something about the zone UTSA was playing, maybe. Right. It's hard to tell for sure, but it seemed like they had some kind of opening they could attack there, and that tight end, I believe Dykes was his name, ended up with probably 1 billion yards. So that was something that was certainly a problem for the defense, but against the run, they were stout pretty
Shut
much
them
the whole
down.
way.
Yeah.
The average was very low, and there were times where Memphis got like a little bit going, but they certainly never broke a long one on the ground. So yeah, I think the defense's performance was solid. I'm sure they can nitpick a lot of stuff they would want to do better, but the defense kept them in the game during that rough stretch.
So let's go all the way back to the first quarter now, Greg, where, I don't want to say that UTSA spots Memphis 21 points, but they certainly didn't, they were shooting themselves in the foot. We had a miscue on the snap that led to the first score, a few penalties that set up the second score, and then that long bomb for the third score. And it was just kind of the worst case scenario. You look up, there's like 6 minutes left in the first quarter and you're down 21-0, and it's like, what's going to happen here?
Yeah, I guess there was a miscommunication on that snap. Is that what happened, where it just kind of felt like they weren't on the same page?
That's what it looked like to me.
So that was obviously hugely detrimental. And I don't know how much that played into what happened over the next couple drives. Maybe, I mean, it was the first time this season that they've been behind. So maybe they were just a little shell shocked and being on the road and having to deal with that. There were some penalties. I know Coach Trailer pointed to after the game and said that this put, like, even on that fumbled exchange there, they were sort of behind the sticks because of a chop block. So it was 1st and 25. And essentially there were penalties on some of these other drives that either helped Memphis to score or set UTSA back. I think they went 3 and out on those next 2 possessions. So yeah, it just kind of took them a while to get rolling. And I thought in the middle of the second quarter, when they really went to that super run heavy approach, I think there was the drive that Brendan Brady had 5 carries and then Sincere had 5 and scored the touchdown. I thought that was kind of where they started to feel like they were back in the game, because the line of scrimmage, they had been controlled pretty thoroughly up till that point. And I don't know how you just flip a switch like that, especially with offensive line situation just getting worse by the minute, that they were able to start taking control and to make some separation on the ground and create some lanes, and on defense be disruptive up front too. After the first quarter, it didn't look like that was possible, but they really turned it around there, and I thought that was critical.
Yeah, to me, I thought that was the turning point in the game when Brendan Brady kind of gave a fresh set of eyes or legs, or I don't know how to describe. I don't know how to describe it, because it was the same running lane, but he kind of just sparked the offense a little bit, and they got things going. And like you said, he was I don't know if it's a change of pace, because they kind of run. I think they're very similar in the style they have. It's just, that was key in setting it up. And I think even Coach said after the game, I think they wanted to try. They were hopeful to have another score before halftime, but they weren't able to punch that in. And it was kind of like, okay, you have some of the momentum, but then it kind of stalled before halftime. But really, being down 2 scores at the break wasn't as bad as it could have been, all things considered.
No, not at all. And it was weird when they scored in the third quarter and they cut it to 21-14. It didn't click in my head for a second that they were only down by 7. You know what I mean? Because it felt like they had been like in a position where they weren't in control of the game basically the whole way. And so then to have them be just down 7 at that point, it was pretty remarkable to say, okay, wait a second, like we totally have a game on our hands here. And then obviously we know how it played out from there. But it was interesting too, because I thought that the formula that they established in the first half of just kind of controlling the game on the ground would carry over to the second. And they came out for that first drive and tried to throw it a little bit. And that drive wasn't the one that ended up producing points. And I don't know, it just felt like they were not going to be able to figure it out in a way that was going to be substantial enough. And then eventually they just did. But which reminds me, I remember one of the interesting things Coach Traylor said after the game was that he called, I think he said Memphis was the best coached team that they've played against, something like that. And basically, like they were just kind of trading moves back and forth as 2 staffs, and that every counter there was another counter, and essentially that they just were going at it unlike any staff that he'd gone up against before. So that was a really interesting battle. And like we're talking about, it was like who was going to make those adjustments to be able to find the breakthrough, especially when Memphis just kind of couldn't put them away.
Pretty wild that the last team with the ball wins this one, considering all that happened. I mean, you look at the overall flow of the game, it was like UTSA made some mistakes, had some things go bad early on, whereas Memphis had those same kind of things happen late in the game, and it kind of almost evened out. And, it just came down to execution at the end, I think, for the Roadrunners.
Yeah, and then I think we should mention Sincere's final line. It was 42 carries for 184 yards and 3 touchdowns, and that's a 4.4 yards per carry average. I think Coach Traylor said he was the best 4.5 yard rusher in college football, which is funny because it makes sense. Like there'll be plays where I watch him and the play doesn't go anywhere, and I think, is there something wrong with him? Is he not all the way there from last year? And then he'll have like a 9-yard run that just looks amazing, like he had to get by two guys and lower the shoulder on a third dude, and it's like, okay, so Sincere's probably fine. They just haven't found that huge breakthrough run. If you add a 60-yarder into any of these games, it looks a lot better than it already looks good too. So yeah, he's just going to kind of grind it out, and it's crazy that he's able to hold up through this level of punishment. Because again, like we said, his best carry of the day was number 39. So he's incredibly durable, and they just keep going to him.
Quote of the day from Sincere was he could run a mile right now after end post. I'm sure he could do it better than both of us. So
yeah, no doubt.
I want to ask you, I guess, just what this win you think means to the program. But did we touch on everything you wanted to talk about in the game as far as gameplay?
Yeah, I think so. If I remember something else, we'll loop back. But yeah, it seems like a huge win in that big picture perspective. The ones that I think always come up are Baylor for the first Power 5 win. The Houston, I think, was like maybe the highest degree of difficulty win. I don't know if that's the best way to describe it, but just like the most impressive from a purely on-field perspective, which today is probably rivals that one.
Right.
And then obviously when you talk about Illinois this year, it's like, okay, that's a Big Ten team, but we've said all along that Memphis was better. So especially when you factor in the 17-game home winning streak for Memphis and some of the teams they beat on that streak, it's like it's hard to win there, to say something completely obvious. And UTSA was able to be the team that snapped that streak. So yeah, do you think it's the biggest win in program history? I certainly think there's a case for it.
Right. I think this is the second time this season we have the biggest win in program history. And that, I mean, you talk about, monumental cornerstone wins. To me, this is the one in the Jeff Traylor era that stands out above the rest because of, I guess, how it went down. I mean, they probably shouldn't have been able to pull this one out, and they did. So, I mean, 4-0 for the first time since 2012. And I mean, just all the momentum right now riding with the Roadrunners.
Yeah, and I think the thing about that 4-0, it is the first time since 2012, but that year they played two teams that were transitioning from FCS and two Division II teams because it was UTSA's second year. So, I mean, I'm writing it's the first, 4-0 against the Division I schedule. And I think that this is, the first like true 4-0, if you want to call it that. I mean, then you could start talking about like how good is Lamar and what is that worth. But regardless, this is a huge mark for the Roadrunners.
Greg, are you gonna lead the way here for the 12-0 undefeated Roadrunner train, or is that something that's completely when does those discussions start to happen?
So the thing about that, we can really go into it in as much depth as you want. I think that UTSA will be favored in every game going forward if things hold the form as they are now. Yeah, because it's a home game. They at this point with the win against Memphis, maybe they're better than UAB in the S&P rankings. It would have been pretty close. But certainly having home field for that one, I would think that UTSA will be a small favorite. And then the other tough one that I think is actually going to be at Western Kentucky in a couple weeks.
Right.
Just looking at kind of the metrics and who projects to be the toughest team, and then factoring in home versus away. In all the other games, they could be double-digit favorites. So, I mean, they have a good chance to pile up a lot of wins here. Now, does that mean that they're going to go undefeated? No. If I say, you have to roll 3, 4, 5, or 6 on a 6-sided die, you're more likely than not to do it every time, but that doesn't mean you're going to do it 8 times in a row. So I don't know what the odds are in an undefeated season. Is it 10% or 12% or 15%? It's probably somewhere in that range, but I wouldn't call it like likely. But yeah, it's worth discussing. Clearly we're discussing it. I think it's worth discussing.
I mean, so obviously my 6-6 prediction is out the window. I mean,
everybody's prediction's out the window now. You don't have to feel bad about that. Yours is just the most out the window.
Right. UTSA has is this a sneaky UNLV team coming up this weekend? I mean, I haven't looked at,
So they lost to an FCS school, Eastern Washington.
Pretty good FCS school.
They played two pretty good FBS teams and weren't competitive, but then I believe it was Friday that they played Fresno, who is like fringe top 25, and then that game came kind of down to the wire. So that seems a little bit dangerous, but
they lost their quarterback or something.
Oh, if that's true, I didn't even know that part. I just know that on paper that, just the metrics, they aren't that strong. So I wouldn't consider that a huge threat. We were joking about this just a few minutes ago, but it's like, is it a trap game? Like, for what? Like, which game is the game that's not a trap game?
They're all trap games, I think.
Right. Because if you're projected to win all of your games, then I guess they're all trap games. But clearly, like we said, UAB and Western Kentucky are the big ones. So if they were going to look ahead to Western Kentucky, being that it's a conference game and that it'll be a pretty tough one, I could see where this week would be a more trap game than some of the other trap games.
I asked Coach Traylor after the game what the win meant in the historical context, and he kind of went that, this is UTSA is a special place, a place where you could kind of do stuff. What was your takeaway from that?
Yeah, I'm actually writing the story about that. I paused so we could do the video because it doesn't run until Monday. But that's, I think, the big takeaway is he said Memphis was one of these schools that when they got here, they said, can we be a program that's like this kind of a program where they have consistent success year to year? And there's a lot of these underlying factors that kind of play into that, whether it was attendance or boosters or just kind of fan engagement or, facilities, all the other stuff that goes into that. And when you can go to one of those programs and beat them, maybe you don't have necessarily all that other stuff, but it's a step to getting there. And it shows that a lot of what you're doing is on the right track. So yeah, I think it is a very big win from that perspective. Obviously stuff like, are you going to contend every year? You can only show by doing it every year. That we're not going to learn that today, but clearly this program's in a lot better place than it was a year ago, and especially than it was 2 years ago. It's, kind of unthinkable, the turnaround from then till now. So yeah, in that perspective, it's a huge win. What did you think about that big picture side of it?
It's to me, it's still a little soon to kind of, look at all that. I mean, you still have a large majority of the conference schedule to play. I mean, you have to be able to compete. And the way this thing is setting up, that UAB game is going to be kind of the one circled, and you got to beat them. You got to take out the king. So I just kind of like this football game was a little microcosm. I think. I mean, the first quarter there's a lot of football left. I mean, you don't write the whole story in the first quarter, or maybe sometimes you do, and you end up have to rewrite.
The more you do,
rewriting the whole thing. So no, I think Jeff Traylor has UTSA in a good spot. And this is wildly greater than anybody could have imagined. I think this is the 7th out of 8th win. 6 out of 7, 7 out of 8.
Oh yeah, I think that right. If you
dating back to aside from the bowl game last year. So I mean, it's just been some consistent winning around here that UTSA honestly hasn't had, which is that scares some fans because usually there's a big letdown after that, but I don't know that we're going to see that this year.
Yeah, I mean, what was the last season? It was before I got here that people were talking about the possibility of 12-0, and what did they go, like 6-6 that year?
Yeah, the wheels just fell off that
so
thing. So
you never know for sure. I mean, how many injuries would it take for something like that to potentially, you never want to count your chickens before they hatch, but it does seem like if everything were to hold the form, that would not be the case this year, but you would have said the same thing then. So the other question that I think a lot of people are wondering is about the top 25 potential right now. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we're going to see some votes come down. I don't know that they'll crack the top 25, but I think in the AP poll, UTSA's only gotten votes one time in school history. Mm-hmm. That was last year.
And that was last year before a lot of other teams were playing. That was kind of... I mean, you have to put an asterisk on that.
So, I mean, they've already gotten votes in the coaches poll twice this year. One vote in the coaches poll twice this year. So we may see a little bit more excitement and hype surrounding the Roadrunners. I got to believe it's going to be a huge hype week this week, Greg.
Yeah, the funny thing about receiving votes is you don't even have to earn it. There just has to be one person who makes a weird decision technically. But I do think it wouldn't be a travesty. I don't want people to take that the wrong way. It wouldn't be wrong if they did earn it. But I looked up, there's 26 undefeated teams if I counted right.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's plenty of one-loss programs from power conferences that are going to get the nod ahead of UTSA. So it seems unlikely just based on that kind of, halfway thinking about it that they would crack the top 25. But yeah, it wouldn't be surprising if somebody decided to slot them into their poll.
What are some of the things you're going to be looking for this week, Greg? Obviously, I think the storyline about the offensive line being banged up. I think I saw Kevin Davis and Mekhi Hart in street clothes at the end of the game tonight on the sidelines, and I mean that just seems like it's a story that's not going to go away.
Yeah, Kevin Davis's ankle looked pretty rough. The way the guy kind of came in sideways and landed on him.
Yeah, he was actually on crutches too at the end.
Yeah, it wasn't like a huge. It wasn't like his ankle totally went crazy the wrong way, but just the force of the impact looked pretty heavy, and so I wouldn't be surprised if that was something that lingered for a little bit. Hart, it was not as clear. But again, he was kind of banged up a couple weeks ago, so maybe there's just some lingering issues. I know it was Sincere's touchdown run. It seemed like there was a player kind of flat on the ground behind him. I said Sincere's touchdown run like there was just one. It was early in the second quarter, and there was a guy like flat on the ground behind him, and he got sort of pushed over that guy. And it wasn't like he got rolled up on, and there wasn't like a great camera angle of it, but he did not come in after that play again, so I presume that that's where it happened, but it could have been something earlier that he was just playing through and then it kind of stiffened up or whatever the case may be. But the interesting thing to me is the guys that we've all seen come in now are guys that we knew about, where it was like Demetrius Allen and Jalen Gallimore. We kind of know that they have a little bit to bring to the table. And then Dom Pastucci's been around forever. We know he can play. Rolf's always been in the mix, but it's like, what happens if one more guy goes down, like then it starts to get really desperate. I think that's something that, Coach Traylor's talked about before, where it's like, the depth is important, but then if you take enough hits at any spot, then it doesn't matter. Eventually, you're just going to be in a tough jam, and I think they're getting close to that. But they can like almost survive with the group that they have now. If this is the five that they've thrown out there, against UNLV, they should be okay. But you can't afford to have any more issues there. So that is something that obviously has to be monitored.
Yeah, and I think also we didn't mention Zakaria Franklin, who's he got banged up last week, and I mean I think I was told he was a game time decision today, and he gave it a go, and it looked at times he was not 100%. I think he took a big hit early in the game.
The first play, the first series, and I was like, oh, this he's done, and he didn't come in for like a couple drives, I don't think, and he was back out there, and made some important catches, and was a big part of the offense, and didn't look to be all that limited. So that was interesting. Usually it's like once you think that a guy's kind of on the fence and then something happens right away, that's it. But no, he toughed it out and he kept going. So whatever the issue is there, presumably it's something that they feel like they can manage. I remember thinking like it was when they were right before the end of the first half, they were like 70 yards from the end zone, and they threw him a 5-yard crossing route where he could have easily taken some big hit, and it was not a very consequential play. And I was thinking they can't be that worried about this guy, or else they wouldn't have thrown him that one. So he can't be too bad, or else they wouldn't have done that. But we'll see what happens.
We will see what happens. Greg, we're going to see Pack the Dome in 32-point font there on the Express News this week. A lot of attention surrounding the Roadrunners this week, I think.
Yeah, the biggest issue for us is how many different ways can we ask questions about eating the cheese and packing the dome. And I don't know, I got to get to work the next 36 hours or so to figure something out, because it's like these are the important topics, I think, especially the like managing egos and not getting a big head. But I don't know what we can say about it that hasn't already been said, although it just gets tougher every week if they keep pulling stuff off like this.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Well, I think that'll wrap it up here. Greg, any final thoughts, or do we hit everything?
No, I think this was good.
All right. Well, that'll wrap it up. I'm JJ Perez in Memphis. Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News in San Antonio. We'll see you guys this week. Thanks for watching.